320 kilometers. That is how far a commercial airliner can travel in roughly 25 minutes at cruise speed. It is the distance from one major city to another. It is enough distance to cross borders, to fly over mountains, to leave controlled airspace and enter the unknown. Now imagine an aircraft flying that entire distance with both pilots completely unresponsive, not communicating with air traffic control, not responding to radio calls, not acknowledging emergency frequencies, just flying straight and level on autopilot. A metal tube carrying dozens of passengers through the sky with no one consciously in control. The radar blip moves steadily across controller screens, maintaining altitude, maintaining course, ignoring every attempt at contact. On the ground, emergency protocols activate. Fighter jets scramble. Airports prepare for the worst. Families of passengers receive terrifying phone calls. And still the aircraft flies on, silent, unresponsive, a ghost ship in the sky. Before I tell you what happened aboard this flight, if you want to hear more real aviation stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Trust me, what you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing incidents in modern aviation history. I am Captain Paul Henderson. I have been flying commercial aircraft for over 25 years. I have dealt with engine failures, electrical fires, medical emergencies, severe weather, and more close calls than I care to remember. But the incident I am about to share with you today represents something uniquely terrifying in aviation. Not a mechanical failure you can troubleshoot, not a weather phenomenon you can avoid, but a complete loss of communication and apparent crew incapacitation, with an aircraft full of passengers flying on autopilot toward an unknown fate. This is the story of Helios Airways Flight 522, the ghost flight that flew for 320 kilometers while both pilots remained unresponsive, and the investigation that revealed a chilling series of errors that should never have been allowed to happen. Welcome aboard, August 14, 2005, a Sunday morning, Larnaca International Airport, Cyprus. The Mediterranean sun beats down on the tarmac, where a Boeing 737-300 is being prepared for flight. Helios Airways. Flight 522 is scheduled to depart at 9 o'clock for Athens, Greece, then continue to Prague, Czech Republic. It is a routine operation, a flight the airline operates regularly, carrying tourists and business travelers between the islands and mainland Europe. 115 passengers board the aircraft, families returning from vacation, business executives heading to meetings, elderly couples visiting relatives, children clutching stuffed animals and coloring books. They settle into their seats, stow their bags, fasten their seatbelts. Just another flight, just another day. The crew consists of 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants. Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten occupies the left seat. He is a German pilot, 58 years old with over 35,000 hours of flight time. He is vastly experienced, having flown for decades in both commercial and corporate aviation. He knows the Boeing 737 intimately. He is thorough, methodical, professional. First Officer Pampos Karalambous sits in the right seat. He is a Cypriot pilot, 51 years old with over 7,000 hours of flight time. He has less experience than the captain, but is still a competent, qualified pilot. The 2 men have flown together before. They know each other's habits and communication styles, but what neither pilot knows, what nobody realizes as the passengers board and the ground crew completes their tasks, is that this aircraft is carrying a ticking time bomb, not an explosive device, not a mechanical defect, but a simple switch in the wrong position, a small error that will cascade into the deadliest accident in Greek aviation history. The pre-flight preparation proceeds normally. Captain Merten and First Officer Karalambous run through their checklists. They review the weather, which is excellent. Clear skies, light winds, no turbulence expected. They program the flight management computer with the route to Athens. They check fuel quantities, hydraulic pressures, electrical systems. Everything appears normal, but during the night, this aircraft had undergone maintenance. Engineers had been investigating a report of a door seal leak. To test the pressurization system, they had placed the pressurization mode selector switch in the manual position rather than the automatic position. This allowed them to manually control cabin pressure during their ground tests. When the maintenance was complete, the engineers should have returned the switch to automatic, but they did not. Whether through oversight or forgetfulness or distraction, they left the switch in the manual position. And when the pilots conducted their pre-flight checks, they failed to notice that this critical switch was in the wrong position. This is not entirely their fault. The pressurization panel on the Boeing 737 is located on the overhead panel behind and above the pilots' heads. It is not directly in their line of sight, and the switch position is not part of the standard scan during routine pre-flight checks. Pilots typically only verify that the pressurization system is set to automatic during the more detailed checks performed before the first flight of the day, not necessarily for every subsequent flight. But on this morning, that missed switch will prove fatal. At 9:07, 7 minutes behind schedule, Flight 522 pushes back from the gate. Engines start normally. Captain Merton taxis toward the departure runway, following instructions from ground control. Everything is routine, professional, unremarkable. At 9:15, the tower clears them for takeoff. Merton advances the thrust levers. The Boeing accelerates down the runway, gaining speed rapidly. At the proper speed, he rotates. The nose lifts. The main gear leaves the pavement. Flight 522 is airborne, climbing into the bright Mediterranean morning. The departure is flawless. They follow the published procedure, turning northwest toward Athens. At 10,000 feet, the aircraft passes through the altitude where cabin pressurization becomes critical. At lower altitudes, even without pressurization, there is enough oxygen in the air for humans to function normally. But above 10,000 feet, oxygen levels begin to drop. Above 14,000 feet, impairment begins. Above 20,000 feet, consciousness can be lost within minutes. As Flight 522 climbs through 16,000 feet, a warning horn sounds in the cockpit. It is the takeoff configuration warning, a horn that normally sounds if pilots attempt to take off with flaps or slats in the wrong position. But this horn has a dual purpose. It also sounds if the aircraft climbs above 14,000 feet, with the pressurization system not functioning properly. Captain Merton and First Officer Charalambous hear the horn, but they misidentify what it means. They assume it is the takeoff configuration warning, even though they are no longer on the ground. They are confused why it is sounding during climb. They discuss it briefly, trying to understand why this warning would activate now. What they do not realize is that the cabin is not pressurizing. The pressurization mode selector is still in manual, and neither pilot has manually controlled the system, so the outflow valves remain open. Air is pouring into the cabin from the engine's bleed air system, but it is simultaneously escaping through the open outflow valves. The cabin altitude is rising in lockstep with the aircraft altitude. By the time they reach 20,000 feet, the cabin altitude is also approaching 20,000 feet. The oxygen levels are dropping, and the insidious thing about hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, is that it impairs your judgment before you realize anything is wrong. You do not necessarily feel short of breath. You do not necessarily feel panic. You just start thinking less clearly. Your reactions slow. Your ability to solve problems deteriorates. The pilots are confused by the horn. They are discussing it, trying to troubleshoot, but their thinking is already becoming muddled. They do not look at the cabin altitude indicator, which would immediately show them the problem. They do not check the pressurization panel. They are fixated on the warning horn, trying to understand why a takeoff warning would sound during climb. As they climb through 24,000 feet, both pilots are becoming seriously hypoxic. Their vision may be tunneling. Their coordination is failing. Their ability to think logically is gone. At 9:20, just 5 minutes after takeoff, Athens Control tries to contact them for a routine handoff. Helios 522 Athens Control, climb and maintain flight level 340. No response. The controller tries again. Helios 522, Athens, radio check. Still nothing. The aircraft continues climbing, passing through 30,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, both pilots are now barely conscious, if conscious at all. The lack of oxygen is shutting down their brains. They may be slumped in their seats. They may be struggling weakly with controls they can no longer operate effectively. We will never know exactly what their final moments of consciousness were like. The aircraft levels off at its assigned altitude of 34,000 feet. The autopilot, not affected by lack of oxygen, continues flying the programmed route perfectly. The Boeing turns at each waypoint, maintaining heading and altitude with computer precision. From a technical standpoint, the aircraft is functioning flawlessly, but in the cockpit, both pilots are now unconscious or dead, and in the cabin, the passengers and flight attendants are also succumbing to hypoxia. Some may have noticed feeling dizzy or lightheaded. Some may have seen the oxygen masks deploy automatically when the cabin altitude exceeded 14,000 feet. But by the time the masks deployed, many passengers were already too impaired to reach for them or put them on correctly. Oxygen masks on commercial aircraft are designed for emergency descents. They provide supplemental oxygen for approximately 12 to 15 minutes, enough time for pilots to bring the aircraft down to a safe altitude where masks are no longer needed. But they are not designed for extended use at high altitude, and if passengers were already hypoxic when the masks deployed, they may not have had the presence of mind to use them. Within minutes, everyone aboard Flight 522 is unconscious. 121 people, pilots, flight attendants, passengers, all of them incapacitated by lack of oxygen. The aircraft has become a flying coffin, a ghost ship carrying the dead and dying through the sky on autopilot. Athens Control continues trying to contact the flight. They receive no response. They try emergency frequencies. They ask other aircraft to attempt contact on air-to-air frequencies. Nothing works. At 9:37, 17 minutes after the last confirmed radio contact, the Greek Air Force scrambles 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept Flight 522. This is standard procedure when an aircraft stops responding. Post-September 11th, any aircraft that does not communicate is treated as a potential threat. The fighters launch from Tanagra Air Base and climb rapidly toward the Boeing's altitude. They position themselves alongside the aircraft, close enough to see into the cockpit windows. What they see is chilling. Through the cockpit windows, they can see the captain slumped in his seat, motionless. The first officer is also unmoving. Neither pilot shows any signs of life. The fighters report what they observe to ground control. Both pilots appear incapacitated or dead. If you are as shocked by this as I was when I first learned these details, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And make sure you are subscribed because this story gets even more unbelievable. Also, share this video with anyone who has ever been nervous about flying, because understanding what happened here might actually make them feel safer, knowing the changes that resulted. The fighters continue escorting the Boeing as it flies on autopilot. They follow it as it tracks northwest, following its programmed route toward Athens. Controllers on the ground are trying to determine what to do. Should they attempt to force the aircraft down? Can they somehow wake the pilots? What will happen when the aircraft reaches Athens? Will it simply continue flying until it runs out of fuel? Inside the cabin of Flight 522, something remarkable happens. One of the flight attendants, Andreas Prodromou, regains consciousness. Unlike the others, Prodromou has additional training. He holds a commercial pilot license and has logged over 600 hours of flight time. He is not type-rated on the Boeing 737 and is not qualified to act as a crew member on this aircraft, but he understands aviation and aircraft systems better than a typical flight attendant. When he wakes, he finds himself in a nightmare. The cabin is full of unconscious passengers. The oxygen masks are dangling. The aircraft is flying itself. He makes his way forward to the cockpit. The cockpit door on this aircraft is not locked. This is 2005, before the reinforced cockpit doors mandated after September 11th became standard on all aircraft. Prodromou opens the door and enters the flight deck. He finds both pilots unconscious or dead in their seats. He sees the warning lights illuminated on the panel. He sees the autopilot engaged, flying the aircraft. He realizes immediately what has happened. Hypoxia, loss of pressurization. Everyone has been deprived of oxygen. Prodromou knows that his portable oxygen bottle, the type flight attendants use, will only last a short time at this altitude. He has minutes, perhaps only seconds of useful consciousness if his oxygen runs out. He sits in the captain's seat. He puts on the captain's oxygen mask, which is supplied by the aircraft's main oxygen system and will provide breathable air as long as the system has pressure. He looks at the instrument panel. He has never flown a 737. He has never sat in this type of aircraft as a pilot, but he understands basic aviation principles. He can see they are at 34,000 feet. He can see the fuel gauges. He can see they are getting low on fuel. The fighter pilots, still flying alongside, see movement in the cockpit. They see someone in the left seat. They report this to ground control. There is someone alive in there. Someone is trying to take control. Prodromou attempts to communicate via radio, but either he does not know which frequency to use, or he is unable to operate the radio correctly. The fighters try to signal him, rocking their wings, trying to get his attention. He waves at them. He is alive. He is conscious. But he does not know how to fly this aircraft or how to save it. At 11:49, nearly 2 hours and 34 minutes after takeoff, the left engine of Flight 522 flames out due to fuel exhaustion. The aircraft is now flying on one engine. The autopilot compensates, adding rudder to keep the aircraft flying straight. 6 minutes later, at 11:55, the right engine also flames out. Both engines are now shut down. There is no more thrust. The aircraft is now a glider, a 100-ton metal tube with no power, slowly descending toward the ground. The autopilot disconnects automatically when both engines fail. The aircraft begins to descend. Prodromo, sitting in the captain's seat, is now faced with an impossible situation. He is not qualified to fly this aircraft. He has no power. He has no radio communication. He has no way to reach an airport. The aircraft is going to crash, and there is nothing he can do about it. The Boeing descends rapidly, losing altitude at over 3,000 feet per minute. Below, the terrain is mountainous, rocky, unforgiving. There are no suitable emergency landing sites. At 12:03, Flight 522 impacts a hillside near the town of Grammatico, approximately 40 kilometers northwest of Athens. The impact is catastrophic. The aircraft disintegrates on contact. Wreckage scatters across the mountainside over an area of several hundred meters. Fire erupts immediately, consuming what remains of the fuselage. All 121 people aboard die. The 115 passengers, the 4 flight attendants, the 2 pilots. Andreas Prodromou, the flight attendant who regained consciousness and tried desperately to save the aircraft, dies in the crash along with everyone else. His heroic attempt to take control was ultimately futile. The aircraft was doomed the moment it took off with the pressurization system not functioning. The investigation that follows is exhaustive. Greek authorities, assisted by Boeing and the United States National Transportation Safety Board, examine every aspect of the flight. They recover the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. They analyze maintenance records. They interview Helios Airways personnel. They reconstruct the timeline minute by minute. The cockpit voice recorder is particularly illuminating. It captures the confusion of the pilots when the warning horn sounds. It captures their attempts to troubleshoot the problem. It captures their voices becoming slurred and incoherent as hypoxia sets in. It captures the moment when their speech stops entirely. And then, for over 2 hours, it captures only the sound of the warning horn, the automated call-outs from the aircraft systems, and eventually the sounds of someone, presumably Prodromou, entering the cockpit and attempting to take control. The investigation determines the primary cause of the accident. The pressurization mode selector was left in manual instead of automatic, and the flight crew failed to identify and correct this configuration error. But the investigation also identifies multiple contributing factors. The maintenance crew that performed the pressurization system test failed to return the selector to automatic. This was a direct violation of maintenance procedures. After completing any maintenance that requires a system to be placed in an abnormal configuration, the system must be returned to its normal configuration before the aircraft is released for flight. The flight crew failed to identify that the pressurization system was not in automatic during their pre-flight checks. While the switch is not in an easily visible location, it should have been checked as part of the before-start checklist. Both pilots missed it. The flight crew misidentified the warning horn. They thought it was a takeoff configuration warning when it was actually a pressurization warning. This confusion delayed their recognition of the problem. By the time they might have realized what was wrong, they were already too hypoxic to respond effectively. Helios Airways had inadequate training procedures. Pilots were not adequately trained on how to respond to pressurization problems or how to recognize the symptoms of hypoxia. The airline had also been cutting costs, reducing training time, and pressuring crews to maintain schedules even when aircraft had minor maintenance issues. The aircraft itself had a design issue. The warning horn used for both takeoff configuration and pressurization warnings was ambiguous. Pilots could easily misidentify which problem the horn was indicating. Boeing has since changed this design on newer aircraft, providing distinct warnings for different problems. In the aftermath of this tragedy, sweeping changes were implemented across the aviation industry. Airlines enhanced their training on hypoxia recognition and pressurization system failures. Pilots now regularly undergo training in altitude chambers where they experience mild hypoxia under controlled conditions, so they learn to recognize the symptoms in themselves. Maintenance procedures were tightened. Anytime a system is placed in an abnormal configuration for testing or maintenance, multiple verification steps are now required before the aircraft is returned to service. Checklists must be signed off by multiple personnel. Boeing modified the warning systems on 737 aircraft to provide clearer, more distinct alerts for different types of problems. The ambiguous warning horn was replaced with more specific enunciations. Aviation authorities around the world mandated more comprehensive pressurization system checks as part of pre-flight procedures. The pressurization mode selector must now be verified to be in automatic before every flight. For me, as a pilot, this accident is particularly haunting because of how preventable it was. This was not a rare mechanical failure. This was not an unforeseeable circumstance. This was a simple switch in the wrong position, missed by multiple people who should have caught it, and it demonstrates how quickly things can go wrong when multiple small errors align. The maintenance crew made an error. The pilots made an error. The airline's training was inadequate. The aircraft's warning system was ambiguous. Any one of these factors corrected could have prevented the tragedy, but all of them together created a perfect storm that killed 121 people. The other haunting aspect is the image of that aircraft flying for hours with everyone aboard unconscious or dead. The autopilot faithfully following its programmed route, the fighter jets escorting it, helpless to intervene, the controllers on the ground watching, knowing that everyone aboard is likely already gone but unable to do anything about it, and Andreas Prodromou, the flight attendant who woke up, who made it to the cockpit, who tried so hard to save everyone. He must have known it was hopeless. He must have realized that with both engines failed and no training on this aircraft, he had no chance of landing safely. But he tried anyway. He sat in that seat, and he tried. And he died trying. His body was found in the wreckage, still strapped into the captain's seat, the oxygen mask still on his face. In his final moments, he did everything he could. It just was not enough. To passengers, I want you to understand something important. This type of accident is extraordinarily rare. The changes implemented after Helios 522 have made it even more unlikely to ever happen again. Modern aircraft have multiple redundant pressurization systems. Pilots are extensively trained on pressurization failures and hypoxia recognition. Maintenance procedures have been strengthened to prevent configuration errors. But this accident also illustrates why seemingly minor procedural violations matter, why checklists exist, why training is important, why we cannot cut corners or make assumptions. In aviation, small errors can have catastrophic consequences. To pilots and maintenance personnel, this accident should serve as a permanent reminder. Check the pressurization panel before every flight. Verify the mode selector is in automatic. It takes 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds could save over 100 lives. And if you ever hear a warning horn or see a warning light, do not assume you know what it means. Verify. Check. Confirm. Your first instinct may be wrong. Hypoxia may already be affecting your judgment. Force yourself to go through the logical troubleshooting process, even when your impaired brain wants to take shortcuts. Helios Airways Flight 522 flew 320 kilometers while both pilots were unresponsive. 320 kilometers of people watching helplessly from the ground. 320 kilometers of a ghost flight, carrying the dead toward an inevitable crash. 320 kilometers that should never have happened, and that, thanks to the changes implemented afterward, will hopefully never happen again. If this story taught you something about aviation safety that you did not know before, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do not miss future episodes. Give this video a like to help more people learn from this tragedy. And share it with anyone interested in aviation, because these stories matter. They save lives by teaching us what can go wrong and how to prevent it. Your engagement helps me continue investigating and sharing these important stories from the cockpit. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult story. Remember that aviation safety is built on learning from tragedies, on implementing changes that prevent the same mistakes from happening twice, on never becoming complacent about procedures and checklists. Fly safe, check your pressurization system, and never assume a warning is something it is not. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson signing off.